Hi, Azzy. Good luck in Arizona. She'll get a kick out of that. Anyway, I hope her mom's watching. She'll be laughing too. Anyway, all right. So, let's see, because we don't all agree on this. F of g of x. This is how you check these, Sarah. Yeah, it looks like fog, but it's f of g of x. So that means you're taking g of x, which is that, and substituting it in for that x in f of x. So we're going to say 3 times 1/3 x minus 4 plus 4, because it just goes in for the x. And then we check this. And if this simplifies to just be x, then we check it the other way, which is g of f. And if we get x again, then the answer is yes. But I'm thinking that this is going to be no, because this is going to be 1x, or just x, minus 12 plus 4. So x minus 8, that's not x, so no. That's the correct answer.
Yes.
Good job. I know I checked with most of you guys at lunch, but everybody all right on that mastery?
Can we do like not a lesson, but like a review?
No.
Like a quiz? Just do a riddle.
I think I probably will delay the quiz till Monday,
Yeah, short period.
based on the requests and all. Yes?
We want this.
Yes.
We won't be able to get through a whole lesson in 30 minutes.
Yeah, we will. This is a pretty quick one.
Wait, I have a question.
What?
Exactly. Was 5 a yes?
Should be here. Was 5 a yes? Yes, it was.
It's
If you
Monday
worked
the
it out
10th.
correctly. Monday is the 10th. So oh, that's screen time.
20 minutes.
I just need to keep hitting it. That's it.
So can she hear all this right?
She can hear me.
We don't like you.
Stop. You know that's not true.
Only Mr.
You know that's not true, Azzy.
It's only Mr. Fowl.
All right, here you go. This lesson's all about domain and range. That's really the focus of it, okay? But it's not domain and range like it was in Algebra 1, where it's like, here's some ordered pairs, just list the x values or something. It's a little more complicated. So it's about square root functions. So we're talking about functions that, in general, look like that. F of x equals the square root of x. And their parent function, which we should know what that means, parent function looks like that, right? So parent function just means if you give us the most basic cliche version of this function or this equation, what does its graph look like? And in this case, it looks like that, right? So the parent function of a quadratic is a parabola, to give you another example. Now that parabola can move up or down or left or right, or it can get compressed or stretched vertically, but in general it's going to look like a parabola. So it's the same idea here. So the Huddle and Mastery are going to ask you to graph, but that's just going to be you going into Y1 and typing it in and going off your table. So I don't think we need to spend time going over that. I think I have one example on that,
Can we make
but
this graph tomorrow? Monday.
maybe.
Quiz, Elena.
We'll see.
What quiz? It's Monday.
She said on Monday.
Oh.
I think
Monday.
she means Monday. All right. So identify the domain and range of this. Domain, range. Okay. So the reason why we're interested in the domain and range here is...
Up there next to it.
No, it's all right. Sorry, Azzy, the iPad shut off.
Sit there and tap it.
No, it's all right. It's fine. Is we cannot take the square root of a negative. Now, for us in Algebra 2, that's not entirely true, obviously, because we've done that. We know we just have to take an I out, but when we're talking about domain and range, we're just talking about for real numbers. So, the domain needs to be something about x that accounts for the fact that we're not allowed to have a negative under our square root. So there's multiple ways to do this. The way to do it by hand, or to work it out, is to set whatever under the square root equals 0. Because that's the lowest that it's allowed to be. Right? It can't be any lower than that. So this would just add 2, add 2. You get x equals 2. So that's the number that goes here. Okay. And then you just have to figure out what's the symbol in the middle, which is maybe just a little bit of like critical thinking on your part. So does x need to be greater than or equal to 2, or would it have to be less than or equal to 2 in this case? So think about it. Choose a number that's bigger than 2,
3.
like 3. This would say 3 minus 2, which is 1. Square root of 1 is 1, so that sounds fine. But if you choose a number that's smaller than 2, like 1, it would say 1 minus 2, that's negative 1. Now you're taking the square root of a negative. Square root of negative 1 is I, but again, we don't want imaginary numbers here. So in this case, this needs to be greater than or equal to 2. That's the only way that we're going to keep a positive or non-negative number under the square root. And then the range is what are we going to get back out of that based on what we're doing. So what is the lowest number that we're going to get out of our square root after we take the square root of a number?
2.
0.
0. How do you get 0? What would x have to be?
I guess.
2.
2. Because 2 minus 2 is 0. Okay. Square root of 0 is 0. So the lowest it can be is 0, so we're going to say y is greater than or equal to 0. Does that pencil actually need to be sharpened? Or are you just trying to make it? All right. All right. And another thing that could help you is when you type this into your y1 and you look at your table, you're never going to see a number that's lower than 0. So that should also help
Hey,
you.
go off. Go off.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So that should also help you to figure out what that should be. So there's your first example. Let's look at another one. Any questions on that first one? I know it takes some getting used to, but so same directions, identify the domain and range. So now maybe on this one, like I'm hoping that you get to a point where you don't have to write out by hand x plus 4 equals 0 to figure out what's going on there.
Well, it's going to be negative 4.
Negative 4 is the number you're interested in. So since it's domain, we have an x, we have a negative 4, and we just have to figure out the symbol. All right. Does x need to be greater than or equal to negative 4 or less than or equal to negative 4? What do you think? Greater than. Yes. Because, again, so you could try some numbers out. I'll tell you, the vast majority of the time it's greater than or equal to. Because you're trying to keep what's in the square root positive.
You have some show up.
Okay. And most of the time the way you're going to keep that positive is by making x larger. Right? The only way that wouldn't be the case is if there was like a negative in front of the x. Then everything's sort of backwards. Yeah, in this case, and if you wanted to write it out, it would say x plus 4. Actually, maybe even the better way to do it, yeah, I think this will work. We need x plus 4 to be greater than or equal to 0. Right? So let's just set that up and then just solve that, and that says x is greater than or equal to negative 4, and that's what we have. That's probably a better way to do it. Do it greater than or equal to instead of just equal 0. So there you go. We'll try that again on the next couple, but that should work. Okay, and then the range. So what you start figuring out is that whenever you have a square root, the lowest possible number we're going to get out of our square root is 0. That's always able to happen if you put this number, whatever it is, in for x. That's how we're getting 0, right? Well, if we consider that, which is the lowest thing we can possibly have for y, as a result of this, I should say, 3 times 0, still 0. So y can be greater than or equal to 0. Again, it won't always be that. But yeah, basically for y, you're saying to yourself, if the square root turns out to be a 0, what else happens that might change that? Any questions on this one? All right. Another one, but looking different. Who can tell the domain just by looking at this one? Joey?
X is going to be greater than or equal to negative 1.
That's it. Yeah, x is greater than or equal to negative 1. But if you want to write it over here, x plus 1 is greater than or equal to 0. Subtract 1, subtract 1. X is greater than or equal to negative 1. So that's what Joey said. And now again for your range, you need to be thinking, all right, let's say the square root is 0. So this is negative 0, which is still 0, minus 4. That's a negative 4. But, so we have y, we have negative 4. We have to think about one more thing. So since there's a negative in front of the square root, so you should be thinking to yourself, what the square root's going to do for us is, the lowest it can be is 0. The highest it can be is anything. It can be infinitely high because you could put a ginormous number in there. And even if you take the square root of it, it's still going to be a ginormous number, right? So the square root itself can be like a big positive number, but then immediately it picks up the negative, right? So say you take the square root of, well, let's even just say 100. Square root of 100 is 10. This is negative 10 minus 4, negative 14.
I was looking at the board.
It cut out again, Azzy, but we're back. Hope everything's good with you. All right. If you choose an even larger number, it's negative a larger number minus 4. So it's going to keep getting more negative in this case. It's not going to get higher. It's going to continuously get lower and lower and lower. So this is going to be a less than or equal to negative 4 this time. Right? This is the highest it can ever be, is if your square root turns out to be a 0 and then you subtract 4. That's like the highest case scenario. Anybody have questions?
Oh my god.
Who's like feeling like this is
I'm
good?
confused on the range part of things.
Yeah.
Like this one.
So like I said, so you want to consider if this is 0, right? Negative 0 minus 4 is negative 4. So that's how you know that's negative 4. If you're confused about the sign, right?
Yeah.
So think about your square root as it starts at 0 and then it becomes positive and it becomes more and more and more positive. But in this case, since it's picking up a negative right off the bat, then when you get a positive number of any sort out of here, it's immediately becoming negative because of that. So it's negative something minus 4. And then the larger that the something is, the more negative it is because it immediately picks up the negative. I mean, yeah, that's basically the best way I can put it. And then this is essentially a slide we've seen a number of times this year that talks about how the graph is going to move depending on if you add a number or subtract a number or multiply by a number or add a negative or things like that. But again, we're just going to use our table in Y1, so it doesn't really matter. So we'll graph this and we'll also state the domain and range. So let's start off with domain and range. I'm just going to put XY because we know we need those. Let's go to Heather. What's the domain? You need to take what's under the square root.
Positive 4.
What about it?
Greater than or equal to.
Yeah, so x is greater than or equal to 4. Anyone not understand how we're getting that? Just so I know where we're having issues right now.
Wait, can you explain that again?
You're the one that did it.
I know. Looking
Yeah. Okay, so if you need to, this is where you could just say x minus 4, because you're always just taking whatever under the square root. Right? And then you say, I need that to be greater than or equal to 0. Because it's not allowed to be negative, because it's under a square root. And then you just solve this little equation, or inequality. X is greater than or equal to 4.
And then if it's not, like if it doesn't work, then it's the other way.
Well, it's not that it wouldn't work. The way that the sign would flip is, so let me just give you an example of that really quick. If you had a problem that was just like f of x equals the square root of negative x plus 3, right? So you would say negative x plus 3 is greater than or equal to 0. So the setup's the same. You subtract 3 still. And you have negative x is greater than or equal to negative 3. And then you divide by a negative. You have to divide by negative 1 here, which flips it. X is less than or equal to positive 3.
That's not right.
Well, it is right. If this were the problem, then it is right.
Oh yeah, for that. Okay. I was thinking of the other problem. Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if it's a negative, then it becomes negative and negative, so it becomes positive, so that is right. So either way, as long as you set it up to being greater than or equal to 0, you'll be all right. How about the range in this case? So let's start here. You always want to start with what is the lowest or highest possible range value, which you find by pretending that this square root ends up being a 0. So let's think through that. That would be 3 times 0, which is 0, plus 2.
It's 2.
That's 2. So that's either the highest or the lowest. It depends what we decide our symbol in the middle should be. But now in terms of the symbol, so I'll talk through this for the people who are confused about this. Again, I should think of the square root. The way that it works is 0 is the lowest thing it can be, and it can get positive and be as positive as it wants. So let's say it's positive, right? 3 times a positive number is still a positive number, and then you add 2.
It's going off.
So it's greater than or equal to.
So it's greater than or equal to, because it's going to keep getting higher and higher. The larger that this square root becomes, right? So greater than or equal to 2. So there's your domain and range. And then somebody want to type that into Y1 and get us a table, and then we can. I mean, some of these will be obvious. For example, if x is 4, then we get 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. So I know that one right off the bat. And that's actually where this thing's going to start. Since we subtracted 4 inside, it's right 4. Then we added 2, it's up 2. But after that, it gets a little more complicated. We have to do 8.
Don't you have to draw your like line down the center? Wow.
No, not for these. That's just for a quadratic. 6 plus 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Has anyone gotten that yet?
What point
Table?
is that?
Is anyone doing that?
Yeah, what point is that, Thomas?
Well, I'm assuming I'm right, but I'm kind of relying on someone to actually check that in the Y1.
I think the only person that
Yeah, go
actually
to the
takes
table.
the live mistake was Sarah.
Do you have the table, Sarah? Okay.
Elena, we've
All
been
right. She hit Y1, but she didn't type it in, so we'll type it in. All right.
Don't we have a biologist for that quiz today? Cass?
That was yesterday.
Well, no, I thought she was thinking about what I'm doing Wednesday.
Okay.
For what?
On Monday.
So I see 4, 2, which I have. I see 8, 8, which I have, and then it's 5, 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it's a bunch of decimals, and then it gets too big. 13, 11 would be the next one. And then if I hit the graph, I don't know, you could just see it from where you're sitting. That's what it looks like. So it sort of looks like the parent function we saw before, but the start of it moved right 4 and up 2, and then it's kind of getting larger more quickly because it's being multiplied by 3 every time.
Wait, what's the third dot? The highest one?
8, 8. So we're going to start here, curve out, and then arrow. So that's what we should have as our graph.
What time is class over?
It's over at 37. So 12 minutes. All right. So I'm going to jump over to the huddle. We won't do all of these based on the time we have. Try 1, 2, 5, 6. 1, 2, 5, 6.
Holy.
You could try numbers 1, 2, 5, and 6 as well, Aslan. I'll talk to you in a minute. Bye.
Probably hurts worse than school.
All right, we're back.
What?
Okay, let me read through these quickly. If we need to talk about any of them, we can. So number 1, domain is x is greater than or equal to 0. Range is y is greater than or equal to 0. Number 2, domain is x is greater than or equal to 0. Range is y is less than or equal to 0. 5, domain, x is greater than or equal to 5 over 2. Range, y is less than or equal to 0. And 6, domain is x is greater than or equal to negative 4. And range, y is greater than or equal to negative 2.
I got all those right.
Good, with my help. So here's, if you're still like not sure, or I'll say this for Aslan's sake or whatever, if you want like a completely safe way to find domain and range, then take whatever's under the square root. So like in 4, if you're looking at 4, for example, you would say x plus 3 and set it greater than or equal to 0, right? We showed that up there. Then you solve that. Whatever you get as your answer to that is your domain every single time. So you would say x plus 3 is greater than or equal to 0. Then you'd subtract 3 from both sides. And it would say x is greater than or equal to negative 3. Boom, there's your domain. For the range, you imagine that the square root is 0 and see what else would happen. So like in 6, if the whole square root turned out to be a 0, and then you subtract 2, 0 minus 2 is a negative 2. So it's y and it's negative 2, and then you have to figure out your symbol. The symbol is always going to be greater than or equal to unless there's a negative in front of your square root. So if there's a negative in front of the square root, it's going to be less than or equal to for your range. If not, it's going to be greater than or equal to. Those rules will work every time. Mastery is the only thing you have to do for homework.
You gonna give us those?
Yes. Bye, Azzy. Talk to you tomorrow.